Hello and welcome to Motorsports Tech Talk, and I'm your host Brian here with your co-host Eric. How you doing, Eric?
Beautiful, as always.
That's good. That's good. That's what I like to hear.
How about you?
Oh, I'm just living the dream, living the podcaster's dream.
Isn't that code for kill me?
Probably, but don't read too much into it.
I won't. Okay, you're having a great time living your dreams.
Yeah, well, it's a great time. This episode, we're doing a little special kind of middle of the week episode where we just want to talk a little more tech, kind of as though it was some sort of motorsports tech talk podcast or something.
I don't know who would listen to that. And it sounds a little weird to me, but I guess we can do it.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if I would listen to it, but I'll at least talk about it. I can do that. That's not Motorsports Tech Listen. It's Motorsports Tech Talk. So,
Yeah, exactly. I encourage everyone who downloads this to talk along with us.
Yes, yeah, talk along.
Especially if you're in public.
Yeah.
Just put your headphones in, your AirPods, whatever you have,
and
just start talking.
Yeah, do it. It'll. It's what we're trying to start here. That's what we're trying to do. So today, I think our first topic, we wanted to talk just start talking about car setup, but very specifically camber.
Yeah. So later, maybe in our next tech specific little shindig, we'll talk about car setup, and that can go for a little while. But since we had mentioned camber curves and gain or not with McPherson versus AA arm, and we also mentioned grid life, which I know a lot of their customers who show up for the show will show up in their stance cars.
Oh yeah.
We figured we would tell you, the sort of the importances of camber, and why you should care, right? If I told you don't get as much camber gain with a McPherson setup, what does that mean to you? Does that mean anything? Like why should you care? So
these are just things we've picked up over the years, either in the motorsports work you've done, in the kind of on the side racing we also do, and on top of that, some of the design work we did for some of our previous jobs. So we're not the be all and end all experts on this, but we picked up a thing or two, so might as well share it as best we can.
Yeah, why not?
So yeah, I mean, I guess first thing you were kind of talking about, we were last episode we were talking about camber curves. So
yeah, well, I guess let's go into a little bit of what that looks like on the car.
Okay.
Describe the curves a little bit, and then describe the situation, and then we'll put two and two together and show what we want and why, right?
Yeah.
So a McPherson setup or a strut style suspension has some sort of lower, I don't want to call it a lower control arm because you can use individual links, but the lower end of the knuckle is constrained. In the front of the car, which is what we were talking about with the Supra, you'll have your tie rod, coming from the steering rack.
Yep.
And then the upper end, of the knuckle is supported with the strut.
Yes.
So dynamically, if you pretend you're looking at your suspension from either the back or the front of the car, right? You have these links which pivot about the car. So the unibody, the car itself, is going to be our ground plane. And if we had two parallel, equally spaced links, and then an upright that connected them, and this is our upper and lower control arm in this case. Well, when they're equal length, that upright is going to remain at the angle it's at through the whole travel, right? Because each link moves the same distance through its arc.
Yep.
Right. And we move to double A-arm suspensions, which typically will have a longer lower link and a shorter upper link.
Yep.
So if you think about how that would work if you were just holding something, maybe with a couple pieces of string, you're pulling, if your upper link on the top is shorter, you're pulling that in more. It can't travel as far. So it gets pulled closer to your ground, or the chassis in this case, which creates, camber. It inclines that knuckle inwards. And this is true in either direction, right? If you think about your 0 point, where the lower control arm is parallel with the ground, even if you go down, or droop is what we call it, right? That shorter upper control arm is still pulling the top of that upright closer to the car because it can't travel as far.
Yeah.
So whether you're going into compression or droop, you're gaining camber. Your static setting is the least amount of camber you'll have.
Yes.
Is it when your lower control arm's parallel? Typically, that's close to the target. We'll just hand wave there.
Yeah.
Right. There's other cars, like you'll see in F1 cars, that's not even close to what they do, but it's an aero trade-off for their front wing.
Yeah.
It's a whole other can of worms. So let's just keep it kind of simple for now, right?
Yeah, of course.
So, and then now let's introduce the concept of a strut. So you still have that lower control arm, but instead of a shorter one on top, you have this bar that connects your strut to, well, it goes upwards, right? It goes to your strut tower. And then if you think about how the upright is going to pivot there, one thing is up, right? It's not going to pull as nearly as much anyway. It's not going to pull that upright inwards towards the car, and it's not going to push it outwards either.
Yeah, like the strut's kind of acting in this case. It's kind of like it's a sliding member that it kind of takes the place of two normal links that you'd see on, say, a double wishbone car. So yeah, I mean, it's like you're saying, it's not pivoting the same way that the double A arm will.
Right.
So your camber curve is mainly kind of determined by that lower arm, right? For a McPherson strut.
Somewhat, right? I mean, that lower arm can do whatever it wants. It's still a relation to the strut points. But the big point is that, or the main point, is that it's not going to move that much.
Yes.
Right? You're not going to gain nearly as much camber. Now this depends on your motion ratio, right? So again, this is all about the angle of the strut. If your angle was, or if your strut was, for some godforsaken reason, almost perpendicular with the upright, you'd have some camber gain. If it was shorter than the lower control arm, don't do that. But just a dynamic thought experiment, I guess.
Yeah. So
and this sort of plays into your sine, cosine, small angle approximations, right? If you think about creating this arc, the strut's at the top of the circle. It's going upwards. You're not having much lateral translation.
Yes.
For Yeah, and for very small angles,
Mhm.
right? So, anyways, that's how this works, or why you have more camber gain with one
Yes.
rather than another.
Yeah. So I mean, it leads to, I mean, comparing that strut to a double wishbone, it kind of leads to that kind of reason why people may say like a Miata or S2000, they're just really good handling cars versus your Honda Civic or something like that, where just inherently that geometry, and there's a lot of more, a lot of other things going into it, kind of what we talked about in the last episode. But it by having that camber curve, there's other things they can maybe be. I mean, you can set, less static camber in order to, but still get pretty good camber and compression,
Right.
and that has a nice benefit of, since, I mean, where you want camber is in the corners where you're going to get that compression, where you're getting that body roll, and then on the loaded side of the tire, you're getting that compression that then leads to that additional camber that you're going to want. But I guess real quick, I bring it down to the very super basics, just so make sure everyone's on the same page here. Camber, of course, is that inclination angle of the wheel and tire to the kind of the vertical plane that I guess goes to the center of the car, or I guess
Yeah.
at least your reference plane there. So the more you go up, that's usually we refer to, or the more it leans towards basically the center of the car, we call that the negative camber, and then
Mm.
positive in the other direction. Just so everyone's on the same page.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Good.
But
But I mean, so like you said, right? You were alluded to anyway. You talked about getting camber when you want it.
yes.
So let's start with what do you want, right? And realistically and simplistically, you're trying to use the tire,
Of course.
right? When you are braking in a straight line, you want that tire relatively perpendicular to the ground.
Yeah.
You want as much contact patch as you can get.
Yep.
And then when you turn into a corner, as you mentioned, you have some body roll.
Mm-hmm.
Now, because of that body roll, your car's plane is no longer parallel with the ground, right? And if you had little or no camber gain,
Mm-hmm.
your tire would follow the vehicle. So with no camber gain, it doesn't really matter which side you're on. But as a quick note, because we'll get into this later, let's say you're taking a right turn, you're loading the outside of the car. That's where the weight transfer is.
Mm-hmm.
So you're adding weight to the left side of the car in a right-hand turn, and you're unloading the right inside. Again, sort of looking only at McPherson, which doesn't have much gain or loss, and double A arm, which gains camber both in Johnson rebound or up and down directions of your suspension travel.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a problem yet, but we'll get there eventually. So anyways, you're going through a corner and you're loading the outside of these tires. That means the tires on the left side of the car are going to be giving you a whole lot more grip than the ones on the right side. These are the ones you should care about more. If there is a trade-off, if you have to sacrifice a tire, you want to sacrifice the inside tire.
Of course. Yeah.
And then I guess we can get into tires in a whole another time.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of all starts with tires, right?
It does. Yeah, so
Ultimately,
this is an awkward place to start, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, it's everything we're trying to do here is to make the tire happy.
You want to optimize the tire.
It's the thing that's contacting the road between you and the car, and it's why that suspension is there in the first place, is to try to, I mean, for one, not rattle your bones into bits when you hit a bump, but also to control that tire in a way that is favorable.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, inherently different tires, they like different amounts of camber.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I mean, it's going to be hard for any.
But I mean, before we get too crazy with what the tires want, let's hop back into our mid right hand turn.
Okay. Yep.
You have your body roll. Just to bring things to a quick summation, you want to be using that tire. So to keep the tire flat on the ground, it needs to have some camber relative to the car,
Yes.
and that's where we're getting at.
Yes. Yeah.
So if your tire was optimized for turning, which it's not, at 0 or perpendicular to the ground, you would need camber in a corner because you have this body roll.
Yes.
And then moving on, I'll let you take over. But like you said, different tires like different amounts of camber.
Yeah. So, I mean, unfortunately for most of us who are doing club racing and just maybe messing with our cars and that kind of stuff, we don't have access to tire data, unfortunately, unlike maybe like a Formula One team would. But actually, maybe they might not even have access to tire data because of the whole control tire thing.
It might be off limits to them. Yeah,
It might be. I'm actually not 100%
Gotta
sure about
go
that.
down to GTLM to get tire data.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, so they definitely get tire data for designing their cars. They get bespoke tires made for their cars, and as well as LMP1 as well. But for the rest of us that aren't designing LMP1 cars, we don't have access to tire data. So basically, we just need to find it through testing and tuning.
Yep.
And kind of goes back to the whole seat time thing. Your car needs some seat time too, basically, and you need some seat time in the old setup area. So, but so as we said, different tires are gonna like different amounts of camber. Maybe some tires can also, and you were talking about braking, how usually you want that contact patch to be as large as possible in that case. Some tires could be a little more, I guess, forgiving to have a little more camber in a brake zone. So it really depends on that sidewall construction, the kind of the and the rest of the construction of the tire. Just
It does. Yeah.
so it's ultimately for us, we just have to kind of find it through testing, changing, making changes, that kind of thing, to find what the tire wants. But for the most part, I mean, there's some general rules of thumb you can apply to really any tire to try to at least get like a baseline setup as far as your camber is concerned.
Sure.
But like you said, like with the braking zones, there's that kind of leads us to the trade-off there. If you run way too much static camber, or maybe your suspension gains a lot in compression, so under braking in that case, if you gain too much in the front there, you could lose quite a bit of your braking performance by basically limiting that contact patch under braking.
And for future notes, this is where we'll talk about difference between roll, right, and just compressing the whole front axle.
Yeah, and dive.
Yeah.
So
Pitch, I guess.
Yeah. So it's so yeah, there's a lot of kind of compromises that you have to factor in based on, because like if you're in a situation where you're doing some budget endurance racing or something, you're going to most likely be stuck with a McPherson front. It's pretty common in most road cars, unless you went with a Miata or
like a smart person.
But so you're gonna have to, find a way to make that work kind of the best for you. So
right, and like you said, that's going to be a lot through testing and tuning.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember. So we were fortunate enough, right? You can get tire data in Formula SAE.
Yeah.
So we had some of that, and I remember, I believe it was the Goodyear tires generated the most lateral force at, I think it was 2 or 3 degrees of 2 or 3 degrees of static camber. So the way they run this test is they'll incline the tire and then put it on this belt of essentially sandpaper. It represents the road, and run it through some sweeps. But what that would mean to you is that you want to get that most lateral acceleration. You want your static camber to be 2 to 3 degrees, and you'd want to keep it there.
Yeah.
Through articulation. So, you'd get your camber gain so that when your body rolls, you're maintaining that peak lateral force generation.
Yes.
So, maybe you want a flat contact patch for braking, but just because of the tire construction, whatever magic those wizards are doing, you want some static camber.
Yes. And basically what you're, like you said, what you're doing is you're trying to make it so that the tire is in that happy place as much as possible, especially in heavy cornering, at least in this lateral case we're talking. But so because of that, and talking specifically McPherson, that usually means much more static camber than you would run in a double wishbone unequal A-arm type setup.
It does. Yeah, it would mean you'd run more if you can. Lots of times with McPherson construction, you'll be limited. Or with the series, right? Lots of Pro Series will limit your camber. So they'll put it in the BOP, or the balance of performance, or BOP, as we called it a lot in the last episode. So it'll be different. They'll give the McPherson cars a little bit more leeway, but honestly, not really enough. So just because your camber is measured on the scale pads at Tech, people who can get more when the car is, actually rolling and driving around on the track will just have an advantage.
Yes.
That's just what it boils down to, is you're limited by a peak number.
Yep.
You can't go past that. So these other people have an advantage.
Yeah. And I guess another thing to think about when you're setting that camber, or when you're trying to find that ideal number, is there's other factors that maybe people don't think about as much. As you also have the compliance of your suspension that can also cause some camber to either be gained or lost. I mean that's one subject, like compliance. It's like the OE manufacturers do a ton of tuning there on the rubber bushings, to not only for comfort, but also they can do some kind of pretty nice trick things to get the geometry the way they want it.
They really do. For another future Tech conversation, I'd love to get into that. Because every time I read anything about any car that has any problem that people don't understand, they say it's the bushings.
Yeah.
Then a lot of vibration analysis, a lot of that sort of work. It's not, it might be. Probably not the bushings. You're probably wrong. You just don't know how the car works.
Yeah, and one of the first things us amateur racers try to do is change out all the bushings on the suspension, and that might be good. Because when you take a Honda Civic or a Ford Focus, don't flip it though. You take one of these cars that were never really set up as track racing cars, and you take them to a track. There's certain things you can definitely gain from tailoring it more towards, you could potentially maybe get rid of some of that compliance that could be working against you in for camber, but for the most part, honestly, for as far as bushings go, it's just nice to get something a little stronger in there that doesn't wear out as quickly. But as far as it doesn't mean you really need to change out those bushings to make a quote unquote real race car.
Right. It does add some nice factor, even if you sort of ruin a little bit of kinematicness somewhere in there. Having those things, those suspension almost points, I guess, be stiffer. It's a little more predictable. So that is even if you ruin the car a little bit, it's a benefit for the driver, and driver confidence rolls into that driver mod, which is key.
Yeah, and I mean, it's changing out the bushings might it's not gonna it shouldn't ruin the handling of the car, but like there's a reason why they always use rubber bushings, like they
Or yeah, whatever they used, right? Like the current GT500 has a few ball joints
hmm
on it, which is cool, right? Yeah, I mean, you don't really see
yeah.
a lot of OEs using ball joints. I feel like those engineers probably picked the ones that are most important.
hmm
Probably did a little bit of testing.
A lot of testing, way too much testing. But yeah, and so I guess outside of like your kind of niche endurance racing kind of situations, especially when you're changing a ton on the car, like just if you're just doing some track days and stuff, I think that's not probably the first place to look as far as the bushings.
No, but we're
But we're kind
starting
of
to get a little
yeah, we're trying to start to stray off the path a little bit. But I
as
guess
we do.
to kind of finish that thought, it's just it could. I mean, some cars maybe have they could react a little bit better or worse from like maybe a bushing change for as far as your camber is concerned. Of course, it can change other things, and that's where you have to kind of balance that thing out. But
Yeah,
but in a car that you're loading up with really really sticky tires that they never really intended you have on there, compliance can be another kind of factor that you want to almost like add in, because usually compliance is gonna, at least so like going through that loaded turning right kind of situation you were talking about, it's the forces from the tire that are reacting to the suspension are basically pulling that tire towards the vehicle, or it's kind of reacting to pull it towards it. So a lot of times that compliance will lead to less camber potentially. So it's kind of another thing to factor in when you're setting it. If if you're working with a car that just has all sphericals for your suspension, then you're probably not going to need as much. You can factor in a little less static camber to fight off that compliance.
yeah. And so Brian mentioned this a little bit about finding in amateur racing, finding what you need through testing. Well, a lot of pro racers will obviously do that as well. I don't want to give you a rule of thumb, right? Because it's so vast. But if you start with a couple degrees of negative camber, maybe you're all right. But the thing is, all tracks are different. The grade of their asphalt, how they work with the tire, and all the tires are different. So you have a lot of variables here, and the weather's different. Generally, right? That's going to change a lot. So, you go to a track maybe like Watkins Glen, which is known to be not as nice to tires, and depending on what you're doing, maybe you want to run a little less camber because you're worried about the longevity of your tire.
Yeah.
Maybe that trade-off's worth it. Maybe not, right? That's something you need to find out through testing. I know a race engineer who was having issue with someone. They wanted to run, I think they were scuffs. It might have been rains. But he said it was so cold out, there's nothing they could do to get the tire warm. So they put just a gross amount of camber in it, right? They almost maxed it out on a race car, which is a lot of camber. Just because, it reduces that contact patch because the sidewall supports the tire more.
Yep.
Right? And with that smaller, area, they would end up driving more heat into the tire. I'm not sure how it worked out. But that was an attempt, right?
Yeah.
They just couldn't get their tires up to temp, and if you need to get them up to temp quicker for some reason, maybe play around with the camber a little bit.
Yeah.
Again, it's going to affect all these other things we're talking about.
Yes.
It's going to affect your braking, your cornering performance.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah, no, the track starts drying out mid race, then you
You
could
could
be
roast them.
left. Yeah, you could left with some pretty roasted tires. So
Yeah.
it's
And then the obvious part is, you're wearing the inner side of the tire a lot more.
yeah.
So,
So yeah, I mean but I think the important part there is for one, uh, like one big benefit I think you'll find if you're kind of modifying your first car is to make it so that you can have a lot more adjustment in that camber. A lot of cars are pretty limited in the
hmm
amount of camber they can dial in.
yeah, if you want to test, adjustability is key.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and even a situation like with say Champ Car where maybe you don't want to run the points of a camber plate or whatever in that specific whatever your rules are for your series, you can still buy some, go out test, use a camber plate because it's going to allow you to change your camber much easier than if you were just drilling holes in your strut tower or something like that.
hmm
It's going to let you maybe dial it in, and then once you find what settings seem to work pretty good, at least at the specific track you're at, or maybe for the car and the tire, you can get a kind of in a ballpark for most tracks. Then you can drill the new set of holes in your strut tower, and then
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
set that as your new, at least that track setting or your new like baseline kind of setting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So but yeah, definitely having that adjustability is very important. So I mean, like I guess for example, in my spec Miata, the one thing that you're allowed to do in the rules is you can either, well, I guess you can do both. You can do an extended lower ball joint, which brings that obviously that lower arm, that lower point of the upright out, which adds negative camber, or you
hmm
can go to an offset upper control arm bushing that you can then shorten basically the effective length of that control arm, and again add more camber. So before that, I couldn't get enough negative camber in there to satisfy that tire's needs. It wasn't. It just there was still and so one way you can kind of figure that out like directionally is with some tire temperatures. It's
Yeah.
definitely a very good way to go about it. And
Yeah.
every time I would come in, like the tricky part with tire temperatures though is that you need to drive the car pretty hard all the way into the pits to make sure you maintain the temperature.
Yeah. The tires cool off real quick.
Yeah, so ideally you want someone in the pit lane waiting for you with the probe, and you race in there basically
hmm
safely, uh, and get those temps taken. But yeah, I was finding that I just had the outside was just too hot. I needed more negative camber to get the outside, basically work the tire was almost rolling over on itself too much because it just wasn't enough camber heating up those outsides, and I wasn't using basically all of the tire as good as it could be. So by taking that measurement and seeing uh, that I could use more, and then found that I couldn't get any more. So from there, I had to update the car, and then from there I could get to the the camber angles I wanted. So it's having that adjustability is very important. And then from there, yeah, testing, having the right tools to figure it out,
hmm
and yeah, and you can find kind of your ideal setup for different tracks, different conditions. I mean, it's going to change with the weather, as you said, like even just the temperature, a cool day, hot day.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. Uh, Listeners, I was going to say viewers. Um, Unfortunately, everything changes, right? So you're gonna need to test if you really want to do it right. Um, with my Miata, I had fairly decent luck with the extended lower ball joints.
hmm
Bolted those in. That just shifted everything,
Yeah,
and I ran a ballpark of, I think it was like -2.5 degrees, and I drove it on the street too. So that's why I wasn't so aggressive. Um, But something else to think about, though, right, is the track surface may generate so much grip, but even at the same track, it gets hotter, it gets colder, whatever, you lose a little grip.
hmm
Now that you have less grip, you have less lateral acceleration,
yes,
which means you're going to have less body roll, which means your car's going to be at a different point through the corner
yep,
with that camber. So,
yeah. So I mean, it
yeah,
really
just get out there and figure it out.
it really shows the importance of also keeping very good track notes
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
setup notes, like however you can keeping track of the ambient conditions. Describe it best as you can. Like even just like the weather might not be enough. Like how's the sun cover? Because some tracks the sun comes out and all of a sudden the track gets a second slower or something.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things going there. Get your notes together, and then that way, after you've been to the same place a couple times, you can look. Oh, it's about the same conditions as it was this time. Let's try running that setup. So
Right. Yeah. Or you can extrapolate a little bit if you need, but I mean, you're exactly right, Brian. Good notes, detailed notes are key.
for sure, and it's kind of it's kind of doing your homework there. It's just making sure you don't waste any of that. Also, you're not wasting any of that sweet seat time that you're getting out there to get better as a driver. You also want to make sure you try to maximize that data collecting, that setup
Right.
work, that note taking. So when you go back there next time, you can hit the ground running. And I know that's something I haven't been the best with, at least over my last season of Spec Miata, and I know I can definitely improve. And of course, it being my first season, I didn't have all those notes together for all the tracks. So now I can go back, look at my static settings at each event that I went into, and then think about the performance, the lap time, and then from there I can keep tweaking.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's definitely probably one of as far as performance from the tire and the suspension, camber is usually kind of the first place you want to look. It's very important making sure you're using all the tire.
It is important. And we mentioned we'll do a setup, a little tech tip later, because changing camber will affect your toe a little bit.
Oh yeah, so I mean,
It's going to change the whole car. So I think we've probably beaten this horse as much as we can within the scope of just camber.
yeah. So I mean, I'm sure we could keep going, but as with everything in the suspension geometry, you change one thing, and all of a sudden, you're not changing some other things too. So
Yeah.
but yeah, we could go for a while on car setup, but maybe future episodes we could dive deeper into the other areas of suspension.
Yeah, I mean, depending on how well y'all like these long episodes, I can just give you a 4-hour rundown on setup.
Yeah, it's all what you guys want. So yeah, just let us know what if you have any questions. We can see what most people are thinking about, cover whatever we can.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, it's something we're planning to do and for a while. So we'll be here. We'll be here to answer everything we can. So
Yeah, but as long as we're talking about doing things on a race car right or properly, I want you to give me your theory on why a time attack car will have specs in every category that should get it to the moon, right?
yeah.
Billion horsepower with a B, all the aero, all the tire, super lightweight. It should be one of the world's fastest machines, right?
And they are really fast,
I mean,
but
they are. But then we see a GT3 car
yes.
roll out. It's got less of all of those things.
Mhm.
All of them. Without question. Less aero, less tire, it's heavier, less power. And GT3 cars are faster, generally. So
Yeah, not only are they faster, but they're doing that for hours straight.
Yeah.
They're
they're about to do it for 24 hours in a few weeks.
yeah. So
And a time attack car is going to do it for 5 minutes before the engine blows up.
yeah, and there's definitely. I've thought about this a lot. There's a lot that goes into it, right? I mean, time attack. It's something I haven't gotten into, but I've followed it because it's always interesting. Everyone likes to see, especially if they're a huge fan of certain types of cars. Like you see an Evo, a Mitsubishi Evo out there, and it's running those super fast lap times. It's cool to see like a road car taken off the street and then just doing lap times that are close to a GT3 car.
Yeah. Sub 140s.
Yeah, some 140 at Gingerman's. I don't know. I don't think GT3 has a lap record there. So I mean, as far as I know, sub 140 should be about right.
Yeah. Somewhere just below it somewhere.
Probably, yeah, somewhere, maybe just barely, but yeah. But time attack, it's fun because it's one of those things where it is a lot about the car, but the driver is always important, as we always stress. It's all about driver mod's very important.
Yes.
And kind of maybe that's where we'd start. I think for one, I mean, there's some definitely great drivers in time attack. Honestly, I think the most successful teams are the ones that will bring a professional driver, because there's a lot of people that, especially even like the unlimited class all the way at the top, that will, it's their car, they built it, and they want to get the track time with it because they put all that all that money, all that sweat, all that all the tears.
It's understandable.
Yeah,
it's just you can't be shocked if a pro comes in and beats you.
Exactly. And also what's tricky with those cars is because they're so kind of high strung, is that you don't want to do too many laps with it. You can't get the seat time in it because you're just going to damage something because of how much power they're trying to run through, relatively small engines and cars that were never designed for that much power. But driver mod, I mean, it always comes through, and when, so that one thing a GT3 car will have usually is a professional driver driving it, depending on the series.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know, when you have some guy called Raffaele Marciello or something like that, I can't even pronounce it right. He sounds really fast, and he probably is, and he's probably gonna be faster than you are in your car, because he's been doing this since he's been 4. Yep. And he's got the seat time. So even though he's never driven your car before, I'm sure he could jump into it and figure it out pretty quickly. He's got the reactions, the kind of the back. He's got the experience to know what the car should feel like and how to push it and what the car feels like when it's being pushed. So
yeah,
it's just, driver mod's going to be important. But I mean, some GT3 cars that they're in amateur level class, well, the AM class in a professional race, like in like SRO, World Challenge in America, Europe. There's sometimes where they put the amateur driver in, and that's the easiest way to see the driver mod. They throw the amateur driver in there, and all of a sudden the car magically becomes 4 seconds a lap slower, and it really goes to show how important that driver mod is. But if we put the drivers aside now, say, your time attack team, you hire the big shot pro guy, and so you're not too worried about the driver mod. Maybe, let's say the same driver in both cars. I guess the next thing you'd want to get into is, I think that really hurts a lot of these cars is power delivery. I mean, yes, they have 1,000 horsepower, 1,100 horsepower, and a GT3 car has around 500 to 600. Getting that power, effectively using it, putting it to the ground, that could be a whole another story. And that's something that GT3 cars are set up beautifully for. I mean, they have traction control systems that work when you're in lower grip situations, and then otherwise, I mean, they have so much grip that it's at least from the downforce, which we'll obviously get into as well. Mm-hmm. That it's a lower number, and so it's just a lot more manageable. And on top of that, with the traction control and everything, it just makes for something that just puts down its power really, really well. And now you have your 1,000 horsepower front wheel drive car or something like that is you're almost, I mean, and I think I've seen teams really make pretty good leaps in this, as kind of the aftermarket ECU game has been upped over the last couple of years, having being able to have access to strategies like traction control and stuff that are working a lot better, and boost by gear, boost kind of almost like and traction control systems, of course, too. Like being able to use the power more effectively,
Yeah.
Is another important thing. So it's and then that kind of goes into the chassis setup as well. Like if the car needs to be set up to handle that power as well, and so it's like you can keep adding horsepower to your car, but if it can't put it down, whether it's the suspension geometry having issues, you don't have the right tire on the car, it can, it can make for something that you're just kind of wasting that power that you put all that effort into making. So
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd say that's another area, is that kind of power delivery area, and there's also, like, all GT3 cars have sequential transmissions that shift super fast. A lot of the top cars nowadays in time attack will have at least sequentially shifted transmissions. Some of them even at the, like, world time attack level and everything, they have full on paddle shifted, race transmissions, but for the most part, I mean, a lot of, if you're still using that stick shift, that's a lot of time you're losing for every shift. So that's kind of another area that you might be losing out that those guys might be losing out time on.
I think there's also something to be said for the car being designed sort of cohesively.
Yes.
Right. So, aero gives you downforce, but also drag.
Yes.
Power's good if you get it from a big turbo that takes forever to spool. Maybe it's not as useful.
Yeah.
There's obviously normal race car things, heat management, which goes into aero.
Yeah.
And then I've seen some time attack cars where they make their own arms, right? Control arms.
Yeah.
Which is cool. I like it. So maybe they do that for an aero thing and they make the arm a little shorter, or whatever. There's a lot of things you're changing, roll centers, or how it migrates. And depending on what you're doing, especially if you start with a stock car, for your time attack, I think lots of people are aware enough to look for like bump steer issues, or roll steer. But these are all things that come together, and it's good when you have a full team all going to the same goal. Right?
Yeah.
I think if you approach a car, and I think this is what happens, though. I can't speak for anybody. I haven't built a time attack car myself. But I think a lot of these amateurs who do build them have a goal for one thing specifically, and they hit it, and then they move on to the next one.
Yeah. So
it's not a package, right? Whereas that GT3 car is homologated, and it's done.
Yes.
Their time attack car, they'll add more power. How well does the suspension handle it? Who knows? They'll add more weight. Well, shit, now you're riding on the bump stops.
Yeah.
I think there's something to be said for setting your goal, and not like a short goal and you have a long goal later. Like, this is what you're going to do.
Yep.
And that's it. That's the end of it. And designing a car to that one spot.
Yeah, I think it's easy.
Because as we noted, there's trade-offs and everything. So
yeah, and I think some people, they go into it, they set their lap time. They're like, how can I get it faster? Okay, we need more power. We need more power. So let's do that. And then, they said, but maybe you had a ton of air on the car, and now you're hitting you're hitting higher top speed on the straight, and you're just riding on those bump stops because now you're going much faster. Your air load's increasing, and now the car is undrivable at that high speed, and so now, okay, let's put a stiffer spring in there, and then you find that the car is just not handling right in the lower speed stuff. And so it's just, if you look at your car like you're designing a GT3 car, if you decide, okay, it's fitting, it needs to fit into this. Honestly, you look at what lap time do I need to do to win this class.
Yeah, essentially.
And then you start from there. Well, how am I going to get there? And you can do basic kind of lap time simulation stuff. I mean, there's some programs out there you can find for free.
Yeah.
You can even do just like cell-based stuff. But like, you look at it and you think, how much power, how much grip do I expect from the tire? How much aero will I need to get the grip I want? And then how much power will I need basically to overpower that aero almost, basically, to prevent the drag from being basically slowing you down more than it's helping you in that case. And that's one thing I think, talking about aero, that's one place where a GT3 car is very, very effective. I mean, they don't have super giant, triple element wings and splitters that stick out 3 feet from the car and all that kind of stuff. And that stuff works. I mean, it makes downforce, but a lot of times I think a lot of people are kind of chasing the balance. They're like, oh, well, I need more rear downforce because that's high speed and it's getting loose. The rear end's stepping out, so I'll add a giant, rear wing on, and then maybe some areas they start to find too much understeer, and really both those things are working against each other. You put that giant wing up there, especially if you mount it really high up, it's basically just tilting the entire car kind of up, like pivoting the whole car from the rear.
You lose a lot of more steering.
Exactly. So what a GT3 car is able to do, which makes it just that much more efficient, is they're generating a lot of downforce from the body of the car, which really has very little downsides. By having a complete flat floor as well as a nicely designed diffuser, they're working their front aero better by drawing kind of more air through the front of the car underneath the splitter, which creates that pressure differential you want basically, on the working surface. I mean, aero is a whole topic on its own, but the working surface, which is the bottom in the case of cars, top for airplanes, we don't want to be flying though.
No, we don't.
You want that air to be basically moving as fast as possible, and the top surface you want it move, as slow. You're trying to make that difference in speed, which makes that pressure differential. So in the case of a GT3 car, they got that flat bottom, so they're drawing a lot of air through the front because they have this nicely designed flat bottom and diffuser, which is basically kind of pulling all that air through, making their front splitter, which is quite small in comparison to most time attack cars, they're making it work much better. And then on top of that, it's also improving the rear downforce by creating the suction under the car, which usually kind of starts somewhere, or at least the peak of it is at the start of that diffuser. So basically they're getting rid of drag by doing it. They're increasing their downforce, and overall just their efficiency is way higher. Whereas if you're just kind of chasing, oh, I need a bigger rear wing, now I need a bigger front splitter, I need a bigger rear, they're kind of fighting each other. And ultimately we'll have more total downforce, but the drag starts to really ramp up, and that's a lot of times why you see these cars have 1,000 horsepower or something, because they need it because of the amount of drag that they're making. They need to make up for it basically. So it's kind of like the most common strategy I see in time attack, especially in like unlimited cars, is just add more downforce, add more power.
Yeah.
Ignore drag, just
add more.
Just add more. And it does work up to a point, and that's why I think that's the biggest contributor why you see these time attack cars. You look at those lap times, because we've done it before where you see the lap times they're setting, the lap records that they're doing or whatever, and then you look at the IMSAs there the next weekend, and they're with the GTD cars, and look at what those guys are doing in qualifying. You're like, oh wow, those guys are even faster, and this car is 600 horsepower.
Right.
And
yeah, that's the question.
So it's definitely, as we said, it's about making a cohesive package where nothing is overmatched for the other things. everything's working together, and efficiency is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you think there's based off of what you've seen with time attack cars and the way they set up, do you think there's a huge difference, I guess, in skill between the vehicle setup, right? Like the race engineers who will show up with a
Yeah,
GTD car compared to whoever's running a time attack car.
I
Because I mean,
mean,
I've seen a car go from a bad setup to a good setup, and that's worth a couple seconds. Do you think there's that differential in skill level between them?
yeah, I mean, it kind of goes with what we were talking earlier about, testing to find the right camber. It's with a lot of these time attack cars because they can't get too many laps in without either overheating or having engine issues or something. It's really hard to find that right setup. You kind of go out there one lap, do the best you can, and you can do some directional changes before the next session. But I mean, usually the morning cool session is the fastest one. So
Yeah,
to get that setting, the setup right the first time is tough. And if you're only doing a couple laps for the whole weekend, that's really not much data to work off of. And so you would have to be very deliberate with how you're taking your data, tire temps, all that kind of stuff to try to get the setup in an area where I'm sure you could gain a ton more. But
yeah,
yeah, I mean, whereas with a professional race team, GT3 car, they're going to be the a lot of people on the team probably have a lot of experience. They've been to a lot of different tracks, maybe running that car or at least type of car a lot. So they're going to have a lot of know-how. They're going to know where to start with. They're going to have a lot of setup notes over the years, that kind of thing. So um, you can expect that they're going to be able to set the car up to its potential.
yeah,
And not everyone will. I mean, even in pro racing, you'll see two teams, same car, two different teams, and one team wins the race, the other one doesn't. I mean, it's the same equipment, but one
yeah,
set it up better, one maybe was driven a little better.
right.
It's not everyone's always going to get it right the first time, but in time attack, it's going to be tough to nail that setup that first time. And with you're not going to then go for a second lap after you made that change. It's just and because with time attack cars being mostly based or all based on production cars, also the adjustment is usually a little less easy than a purpose built race car.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, I'm sure with how much power they're making, how much downforce, just a setup change could be a couple seconds depending on where you are.
Yeah,
But yeah, so there's definitely a lot that goes into it. And those, I mean, of course the GT3 car is going to be designed nicely because it's designed usually by either a manufacturer or one of those kind of partners to a manufacturer, and they got
hmm,
fully fully salaried engineers that are designing parts for this thing, and it's all
right.
machined in house potentially, and it's they have the resources to get it done right. They're probably doing CFD work,
Yeah,
which I'm seeing more often now in time attack and amateur racing. It's becoming more accessible, but good CFD work, especially that's validated later in the wind tunnel,
hmm,
which I imagine they're doing as well. That's gonna take it to the next level, basically.
I think so. It's a good place to put in a side note that it's very easy to do CFD wrong and get an answer that you believe.
Yes.
So for all you amateurs at home, I'm not telling you you're doing it wrong, but I am telling you I can get an answer that is super wrong.
Oh yeah.
But if I showed you the cool colored lines, uh, it would look right.
Yeah. Yeah,
You
and
know?
it's definitely something to look out for. I mean, most people aren't doing CFD yet in this level, in time attack and amateur endurance racing, that kind of stuff. But I'm sure we'll see it more and more often. And
Hmm.
but it's definitely it's a warning to, if you decide you want to pay someone to do that, be wary of those results if they're, and anytime you're doing something like that where it's for where you're just having them do some quick CFD work for your car. It's really hard to. You need to validate it. I mean, if you don't have a wind tunnel, which I don't think either of us do,
No.
and most people have access to, or I mean, you have access to it. You just need to bring a big blank check and be okay with writing off a ton.
Right.
But
A2A is not too bad, I guess.
but ultimately, you can still get some good data from the track from trying those different setups.
Right.
And that's where, I mean, that's ultimately where you want to see that result. So, it just goes down to keep going to the track, get that seat time, get that setup time in, keep trying new things. But, I think you could probably be better off instead of spending hours and hours in CFD trying to do something, instead just do a couple extra test days, track days, and try different parts on the car. That could be potentially more beneficial. But I think ultimately it's still impressive though that these people who aren't professionals, racing, race teams, engineers and stuff are taking these cars and making them nearly as fast as GT3 cars. Is still pretty impressive. I mean, it's probably one of the easiest ways to. It's still not easy, but it's maybe less expensive ways to drive a car that fast is to build something like that. Unfortunately, it's only going to be for a lap or two at a time and not like a full race. But it's definitely something I think I would like to get into one day.
It would certainly be fun. I think it would be a good time. I agree.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, I always follow it and I enjoy it. But yeah, if I could just go out and spend $800,000 in a GT3 car, I could wipe the floor with everyone in most time attack classes. I think it would still be legal, right? It's unlimited.
I mean, in an unlimited class, you should be able to. Yeah.
But it's kind of obviously it's a lot of time attacks about making those changes, learning.
Mm-hmm.
Improving both you and in the car, and I think that's a pretty cool pursuit to be a part of.
Yeah.
But also, I'd love to drive a GT3 car. That'd be sweet.
No, fuck yeah, it'd be sweet. It'd be so cool.
Yeah, that's definitely that's a dream. I mean, maybe one day, at least just drive one. I'm never going to own one or be paid to race one, but if I could just.
Yeah, shout out to any GTD or maybe if you're an SRO, just a GT3 team who needs an AM driver. I am free 99.
I'll give you $10.
I'll give you $10 and a chicken sandwich from Chick-fil-A.
Oh, man,
I know it's hard to beat.
Yeah,
Chick-fil-A. I will wait in that 2-hour line for the one Chick-fil-A that's like in our area.
Well, I can't beat that, so I guess you got it. You got me.
GT3 cars. My ride.
Yeah, it'd be sweet. I mean, it's kind of GT3 is kind of I'd say it's the one of, I don't know, it's because you can get like LMP3 cars can sometimes be less expensive than those. I mean, it depends. To just buy one versus running it in a race series is two different things. But
I think they are cheaper in every aspect.
Yeah,
because the LMP3 cars, I think, were a Nissan V8.
Yeah.
So I don't know how they've progressed through the years, but someone I was talking to a year and a half ago, so they were pretty bulletproof. They apparently. It's the one he worked on. I don't know if that was a mechanic problem or if it's how the vehicle is designed. But he said it ate through CVs.
Okay.
So that was annoying. But otherwise, as long as you didn't bin it, they were pretty bulletproof.
Yeah. But I'd say that's what I'd call, a real race car, right? It's purpose built. It's only meant for racing. There's no road version of it.
Right.
Whereas, I mean, even a GT3 car is probably definitely the entry into like that purpose-built race car. Yes, it's based on an Audi R8 or a Ferrari 488 or something like that, but
it's not.
They basically throw away most of it All the suspension is going to be bespoke. The whole body is basically, custom carbon, all that kind of stuff. The engine, might be based on the road going one, but it's going to be gone through, and they're going to be adding dry sumps and all that kind of stuff. And so you end up with something that's, basically a purpose-built race car in a car body almost. But there's still unibodies and everything. But after you add all the cage and everything, it's still very different. So, but definitely one of my favorite cars to watch racing, though. Like just seeing the different race series, especially SR Europe. They got lots of cars out there, and it's always good racing. They got the factory drivers driving them, so it's always a good show.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, maybe one day we can drive one.
One of these days. How much are they?
I don't know, as much as.
I don't think they're $800,000. I think they're cheaper. I just don't know how much.
I'm sure if you bought a brand new one from Audi or Ferrari or something, it would be $800,000 probably. You can probably find an older used one for less.
Are you talking about GTD cars?
Sorry, GT3.
Yeah, I'm talking about the LMP3 car.
Oh, LMP3.
I'm saying I think the LMP3 car is substantially cheaper than
I think you can. I think I've seen them on good old Racing Junk for like
classic
300,000 or so. So
that's a steal.
It's a steal. I mean, it's a fast car.
It is a fast car.
Even LMP2 you can sometimes find. Maybe the old previous year vehicles, but you can find LMP2 cars too for not crazy cost. But it's just like the second you have to change the transmission, which is a wear item. I mean, it is for any car, but in that case, like
it's a real wear item,
like every couple races kind of wear item.
Yeah.
And then the amount, how much you would have to pay for a new transmission shipped from the UK from X-Track. It's it'll get expensive.
It's not
fast.
A good deal anymore.
No, not a good just have fun track day kind of car kind of deal.
Yeah.
But yeah, if I'm really old and I'm trying to get rid of all my money before I find myself in the grave, it wouldn't be the worst way to just go out with a bang, just buy a car and LMP2 car and go for some track days and probably still get passed by some Miatas.
Probably. The Miata is the penultimate sports car.
Yeah, I hear it's probably the fastest car in the world by basically everyone's standards.
Yeah.
But, I drive those all the time. I'm more in for a more exotic experience.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You're one of those people.
Yeah. You gotta show off a little more.
Sure. Yeah. And a Miata's, unless you're flipping your headlights up and down, you're not showing off.
Yeah. That's the biggest problem with my car is that only one side works. So I can only wink at people.
Yeah.
So it works too, I guess. But that should be on the top of my list. New engine, nah.
Fix the
headlights. I need to be able to do the pop-up celebrations.
Yeah, dude.
So
you need to be able to do that for your next one.
I do. So that's just going to the top of my list.
Good. That makes me happy.
Well, I think that's enough for today. I think there was a good little tech talk there.
Yeah, good little tech intermission, I suppose.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. These tech talks would be great for, or great opportunities for anybody who has any questions about setup or vehicle dynamics or any of that sort of nonsense.
Yeah.
Tell us if you have a question and we'd be happy to answer.
Yeah. So let us know through whatever means, through all the different social networks, everything. Reach out to us. We'll be listening. I mean, we're just starting this, so right now it's really fair game for anyone.
Yeah, I mean, if you want a question answered, do it now before we blow up, son.
Before there's thousands.
Get too big, yeah.
There's thousands listening, but for now, for the
the
one person who made it to episode 3.
Yeah, if you made it all the way to episode 3, I feel bad for you. I'll buy you a drink. and let us know if you have any questions.
Yeah, so we'll see what we can get into. You know, we're not experts on everything, but really we're not experts on anything. But we'll give our 2 cents with for whatever's that's worth.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think next episode we'll probably get into, we got the last Formula One race of the season.
Yeah, it's coming up.
And whatever else comes up, there's always some good stuff. So
Always.
so yeah, till next time, we'll talk to you later.
Later.